She was the first woman to wipe away the tears of a 17-year-old boy who had just lost his mother. Angela Robinson, 10 years older, his mother's friend, the only light in a house drowning in silence. Before leaving Detroit, Marcus Reed held her tightly, his voice trembling. "One day, I'll come back and marry you." She only smiled, faint and distant, as if it were nothing more than a child's promise. Years passed. Marcus kept his vow burning in silence, but when he returned, it was too late. From the shadows, he watched Angela walk out of the church, radiant in white, her hand in another man's. The bells rang. Her laughter shattered him. He left again, broken but determined. If he wanted her to believe him, he would have to become a man the world could not dismiss. 8 years later, Angela's husband was gone. She stood alone, 2 children, a faded house, and the cruel pity of neighbors. Then, one afternoon, a black Cadillac Escalade stopped outside her door, and from it stepped Marcus Reed, no longer a boy, but a billionaire who had never stopped loving her. At 17, Marcus Reed lived in a house that no longer felt like home. The halls of their small Detroit home echoed with silence. His mother's laughter, once warm and musical, had vanished. She was gone, taken too soon, leaving behind only the faint scent of tulips she once loved to plant. His father, once a strong figure, had sunk into the shadows of whiskey and regret. Every evening, Marcus watched him collapse deeper into the armchair, glass in hand, words slurred, eyes empty. The man who should have guided him now felt like a ghost. Marcus carried the weight alone. At school, friends didn't know how to speak to him. Neighbors whispered with pity but offered no comfort. The loneliness pressed heavy against his chest, as if the walls of the house themselves were closing in. And yet, in that darkness, Marcus longed for something, someone, to pull him back to life. A voice, a presence, a spark of hope. Without it, he feared he would drown just like his father. This was the boy Angela Robinson would come to see. Not the confident man of the future, but a teenager whose very right to live fully was slipping away with every silent night. Angela Robinson lived just a few houses down the street. At 27, she carried herself with grace, but it was her kindness that marked her presence. She had been close to Marcus's mother, and when sickness entered their home, Angela often appeared at the door with casseroles, warm meals, and words that softened the air. Marcus remembered her gentle voice filling their kitchen. He remembered how the sound of her footsteps meant relief in a house that had forgotten joy. She spoke with compassion, listened without judgment, and seemed to know exactly how to calm a boy drowning in grief. To his father, she was simply a neighbor and friend. To Marcus, she became something else. She was the anchor that held him steady when the storm threatened to pull him under. Her smile carried a quiet strength. The way she reached for his shoulder in passing gave him the smallest flicker of belonging. She never knew it, but she was teaching him what love could feel like. Safe, patient, unspoken. And though she was 10 years older, Marcus's young heart attached itself to her completely. She was light in a house of shadows, and to him, she became everything. The night before his departure to Canada, Marcus found himself walking the quiet Detroit street that led to Angela's porch. The summer air was heavy, pressing against his chest as his heart beat faster with every step. He was only 17, yet every part of him felt the weight of what he was about to say. Angela sat outside, rocking gently in her chair, the glow of a lantern softening her face. She looked up and smiled when she saw him, the kind of smile that both comforted him and broke him at once. He stood before her, trembling. "I don't want to leave," he whispered. She rose, brushing a hand across his cheek like he was still a child. "Your father thinks it's best. Canada will give you a fresh start." The words spilled from him before he could stop them. "I don't want a new start. I want you." Angela froze, eyes wide with disbelief. Then she laughed softly, shaking her head. "Marcus, you're sweet, but you don't understand yet." He straightened, voice trembling with resolve. "I do understand. I love you, Angela. One day, I'll come back and make you my wife." She smiled sadly, unable to believe him. The next morning, the train pulled away from Detroit. Marcus pressed his forehead against the window, his reflection blurred by the streaks of motion outside. His father was not there to see him off. Only his aunt and uncle stood waiting, but their presence brought little comfort. As the city faded into distance, so did the sight of the life he had known. Yet his heart refused to release Angela. He could still feel her hand against his cheek, still hear her laughter soft with dismissal, still see the sadness in her eyes when she told him he was too young. Marcus closed his eyes. The rattling hum of the train became the rhythm of his vow. "I'll come back for you, Angela," he whispered into the moving night. "No matter how long it takes, no matter what I must endure, one day you will see me not as a boy, but as a man, and on that day I will marry you." The words etched themselves into him like fire. For the first time, Marcus understood that promises are not just spoken. They must be lived, carried, and proven. And so began his journey, away from Detroit, but never away from her. 3 years passed. Marcus had built a rhythm in Canada, lectures, late nights of study, and the quiet ache of distance. Then one evening his aunt entered the room with a letter in her hand. Her eyes carried pity. She hesitated before speaking. "It's Angela," she said softly. "She's getting married." The words pierced him like a blade. He froze, the floor beneath him suddenly unsteady. He read the letter once, then again, hoping the words would change, but they remained cruelly the same. Angela Robinson was about to become someone else's wife. Marcus booked the next ticket to the States. His hands shook as he packed, his mind a storm of desperate hope. Perhaps he could stop it. Perhaps, if she saw him now, she would understand. He arrived in Detroit breathless, heart pounding. The bells of the church rang before he reached the steps. Outside, he saw her, Angela, radiant in white, her hand tucked into another man's. She laughed, the sound ringing like glass breaking inside him. She never looked his way, and Marcus, standing in the shadows of the street, felt the promise he had made burn deeper, searing his heart with a pain he could never forget. That night, Marcus sat in the driver's seat of his rented car. The street outside Angela's small house was quiet, except for the soft glow spilling from her windows. He could hear muffled laughter within, the joy of newlyweds beginning a life together. His fists clenched against the steering wheel. Tears stung his eyes, hot and unrelenting. He tried to swallow them back, but the ache in his chest was too heavy. Every corner of the neighborhood whispered her name. Every light from her windows mocked him with the life she had chosen without him. He stayed there for hours, staring, remembering every moment they had shared. The touch of her hand, the sound of her voice, the promise he had whispered on the train. Now, it all felt like a cruel dream. At last, he started the engine and drove away. The road blurred through the tears. But inside, a fire began to grow, not against Angela, never against her, but against the belief that life could deny him so easily. That night, Marcus decided he would never again be dismissed as a boy. If he wanted her, he would build himself into a man the world could not ignore. Back in Canada, Marcus poured every ounce of his heartbreak into work. Grief hardened into determination. While his classmates studied at a steady pace, he devoured textbooks, mastered finance, and chased every opportunity with a hunger no one else understood. Failure was not an option. He remembered Angela's smile, the way she had brushed his cheek, the way she had doubted him. He would prove her wrong, not with words, but with a life so undeniable that no one could dismiss his love again. He took risks others feared. Investments, trade ventures, partnerships across borders. Some thought him reckless, but his instincts were sharp. Each success added fuel to his momentum. Each victory carried him closer to the man he vowed to become. At night, when exhaustion pressed down, he would close his eyes and whisper her name. Angela. The thought of her steadied him. She was no longer a distant dream. She was the reason behind every late hour, every bold move, every sacrifice. And so Marcus Reed, once a grieving boy in Detroit, began to transform. Heartache had become his compass, determination, his weapon, his vow, his anchor. By 24, Marcus Reed was no longer just successful. He was wealthy beyond what his family had ever imagined. Professors who once doubted him now praised his brilliance. Businessmen twice his age sought his partnership. By 27, he was a name spoken in boardrooms and financial journals. A billionaire born from nothing, forged by grief and relentless drive. His ventures in technology and global investment placed him among the youngest moguls of his time. But through the glamour of suits, the glow of city skylines, and the endless deals signed in quiet conference rooms, one truth remained unshaken. Marcus still loved Angela Robinson. At social events, women admired his charm, whispered about his fortune, yet his eyes never lingered. His heart refused to move. In every success, he searched for a glimpse of her, imagining her smile, her voice, her presence in a world that had once felt like home. His life had changed. His bank account, his reputation, his very posture carried power. But the promise he made as a boy still lived, unchanged beneath the surface. He was no longer a child chasing dreams. He was a man prepared to reclaim them. 8 years had passed when the call came. Marcus's father in Detroit was gravely ill. The news stirred a storm inside him. Grief for a man who had never truly been there, guilt for the silence that stretched between them, and something else. Hope, because returning home meant one more chance to see Angela. Marcus packed quickly, leaving behind the glittering offices of New York. On the flight, he stared out at the city lights fading below. His mind was not on board meetings or investments. It was on the woman who had shaped his life, even in absence. He whispered to himself, steady and sure, "This time, I won't be the boy she dismissed. This time, she'll see me for who I've become." When the plane touched down, the air of Detroit felt heavy with memory. The boy who had once left in grief would return as a man carved by fire and fortune. Marcus Reed was coming home. For his father, yes, but above all, for Angela Robinson, the woman who had been his anchor in the storm, the woman he had never stopped loving. And in his heart, the vow still pulsed, alive as ever. Detroit buzzed with curiosity, but Atlanta became the stage. Marcus's father, desperate to show off the son he barely raised, organized a gala, unlike any the city had seen. Crystal chandeliers lit the ballroom. Music floated through the air. Men in tailored suits and women in gowns whispered as they entered. "This is Marcus Reed," people murmured, "the boy who left Detroit, the billionaire who conquered New York." His father stood proudly at the entrance, cane in hand, voice stronger than his body allowed. "This is my son," he declared, "a man who has made his mark in the world. He is the future of this family." Marcus shook hands, offered polite smiles, but his eyes carried no joy. Wealth glittered around him, yet it felt like a performance staged for others. The champagne, the compliments, the envy, they were masks. To the city, the party was about money and status. To Marcus, it was an empty room filled with noise. He did not come back to be celebrated. He came back with a different purpose, and as the music swelled, he began to scan the crowd, searching for something real, something that no amount of wealth or power could replace. Then, across the crowded ballroom, Marcus saw her, Angela Robinson. She stood near the edge of the room, simple in her dress. No diamonds, no jewels, no glittering fabric. Yet she outshone them all. The years had touched her gently, leaving strength in her posture, quiet beauty in her face. Beside her stood 2 children, a boy and a girl. Their small hands clung to her skirt, their eyes wide as they watched the sea of strangers around them. Marcus's breath caught. For a moment, the sound of music, the chatter, the clinking glasses, all of it vanished. He saw only her. Angela. The woman who had once brushed his cheek with kindness and broken his heart with doubt. She looked older, yes. Worn by trials, yes. But to him, she was more radiant than ever, because she had endured. Because she still carried herself with dignity when the world whispered against her. It struck him then. She was not the past he longed for. She was the present he had returned for, and as his chest tightened, Marcus knew he had never stopped loving her. His father noticed where his son's eyes had fallen. The old man leaned closer, his voice rough but sharp. "She was abandoned. Her husband walked out after 8 years, left her with those kids. Pitiful, really. Don't embarrass yourself by going near her." Marcus turned his head slowly, his jaw tight. He stared at his father, the man who once drowned in whiskey instead of raising him. "Not another word," Marcus said firmly. His tone cut through the noise of the room. For the first time, his father fell silent, unsettled by the steel in his son's voice. Around them, whispers spread. Some guests had noticed. They spoke of Angela in hushed voices, repeating cruel stories. Damaged. Too old. A burden. But Marcus's gaze never wavered. He saw none of the labels, none of the pity. He saw only the woman who had once saved a grieving boy from loneliness. The murmurs grew louder, but Marcus blocked them out. He had not built an empire to be told whom he could or could not love. Angela was here. That was all that mattered, and no voice, not his father's, not the city's, would keep him away from her now. Gathering his courage, Marcus crossed the ballroom. Each step felt like a lifetime compressed into a heartbeat. The crowd blurred, the chandeliers dimmed. All he could see was Angela. When he reached her, she looked up. Her eyes widened, and for a moment she simply stared. Then a soft laugh escaped her lips, uncertain but familiar. "Well," she said quietly, "if it isn't the boy who once promised to marry me." Her children tugged gently at her dress, curious about the tall man standing before them. Marcus smiled faintly but kept his eyes fixed on her. "I'm not a boy anymore," he said. His voice was lower now, steady, filled with the weight of years. Angela tilted her head, studying him. She searched his face, as if trying to reconcile the teenager she remembered with the man before her. "You've changed," she admitted. "Not in the ways that matter," he replied. The air between them tightened, charged with memories, with questions left unspoken. Around them, the party continued, but here, in this moment, time seemed to pause. Marcus had waited years for this meeting, and now, standing before her again, he refused to let the moment slip away. The evening moved on, but Marcus's father was relentless. Pulling him aside, he gestured toward the mayor of Atlanta, a tall, stern man with watchful eyes. At his side stood Clara, the mayor's daughter, her gown sparkling under the chandeliers. "Spend time with her," his father pressed. "Donald Creek has been generous to us. We owe him. And this could secure our family's future." Marcus knew what that meant. The gambling debts, the whispered promises, his father's salvation, wrapped in an arranged marriage. He glanced at Clara. She smiled at him, her gaze bright with intent. But Marcus's mind was elsewhere. His eyes drifted back toward Angela, who now guided her children through the crowd, her presence quiet yet unshakable. His father's voice hardened. "You can't waste yourself on a woman like Angela. She's older, burdened, cast aside. The city would laugh." Marcus met his father's gaze, unflinching. "Let them laugh," he said coldly. His father's face reddened, his anger sharp and bitter. But Marcus no longer cared. Wealth, politics, reputation, none of it mattered compared to the promise that had carried him through every trial. He had built his life for this moment, and he would not trade it away. In the days following the gala, Angela kept her distance. She avoided the places she knew Marcus might appear. When she saw him in the street, she crossed to the other side, her children's hands clutched tightly in her own. At night, she sat alone in her modest kitchen. The children slept, and the silence pressed against her chest. She thought of Marcus, his steady eyes, his voice deeper than she remembered, his confidence impossible to ignore. Yet, she whispered to herself, "He belongs to another world. I belong to my children." She replayed the moment in the ballroom, when he had looked at her as if no one else existed. Her heart had leapt, but fear soon followed. Marcus carried the weight of wealth, power, and expectation. She carried the weight of two small lives who depended on her. To let him near would be to risk more than her own heart. It would risk theirs too, and she could not allow that. So Angela built walls. Walls of silence, walls of avoidance. Walls she prayed would protect her from the longing that threatened to undo everything she had carefully held together. Rain fell hard against the streets of Atlanta. Angela hurried out of the pharmacy, clutching a bag of medicine close to her chest. Her face was pale, her steps frantic. "Michael's fever won't go down," she whispered to herself, fear cutting through her voice. As she rushed toward home, a familiar figure appeared. Marcus, tall against the rain, stepped from the shadows. His eyes caught hers instantly. "What's wrong?" he demanded, sharper than he intended. "It's Michael," she admitted, her voice breaking. "He's so hot. I don't know what else to do." Without hesitation, Marcus took the bag from her trembling hands. "Take me to him." Inside her small house, the boy lay curled in bed, his cheeks flushed, his breath shallow. Angela knelt beside him, stroking his hair, whispering comfort she barely believed herself. Marcus moved with quiet urgency. He prepared the medicine, fetched water, adjusted the blankets, and stayed at the boy's side. Through the long hours of night, he did not leave. When Angela grew too weary, her head resting on the mattress, Marcus remained awake, watching over the child as though he were his own. By dawn, the fever finally broke. Michael's breathing steadied, his face cooler against Angela's palm. Relief washed through her in waves, leaving her trembling. She turned her head and saw Marcus, still seated in the chair, exhaustion written across his face. Yet he did not complain. He had stayed every moment, refusing to leave her son's side. Angela's eyes blurred with tears. The sight of him, a man with wealth and power beyond imagination, sitting humbly in her small, worn home, cradling her son's frail hand, it pierced her in a way she could not resist. This was not charity. This was not pity. This was devotion. For the first time, Angela saw what she had feared to admit. Marcus did not only love her, he loved her children. He had claimed them in his heart without hesitation. Her lips trembled as she whispered, though he could not hear, "Why are you doing this?" The tears slipped down her face freely. She knew then that her carefully built walls were beginning to crack, but fear was waiting, just beyond the edges of her gratitude, ready to take hold again. Later that morning, when Michael slept peacefully, Angela found Marcus still near. His presence filled the room, steady and unyielding. She stepped closer, her emotions tangled between gratitude and dread. "You shouldn't be here," she said, her voice unsteady. "Why not?" he asked gently. "Because you're too young," she whispered, her hands trembling. "Because one day you'll wake up and realize I was never enough. You'll leave, and I—" Her voice broke. "I can't survive that again. I can't let my children suffer the way I have." Her words cut into the quiet. The fear in her eyes was sharper than anger. It was the fear of a woman who had already lost once and carried the scars to prove it. Marcus stood still, letting the weight of her confession settle. He saw the truth in her, the terror that held her back more than any barrier the world had set. Angela turned away, clutching the edge of the table as though it might hold her upright. "Please, Marcus," she said softly, "don't make promises you can't keep." Her heart longed for him, but her fear screamed louder. Marcus's jaw tightened. He stepped closer, his voice low but unshakable. "You think I don't understand pain?" he said. "You think I don't know what it means to be left behind? Angela, you broke my heart once. You married another while I watched from the shadows. And still, I am here." She froze, his words striking deep. "I built my life with you in mind," Marcus continued, his tone fierce. "Every late night, every risk, every victory. Do you think it was for anyone else? No. It was for the woman who told me I was too young, the woman who walked away, the woman I still love." Angela's breath caught. Tears filled her eyes, but she shook her head weakly. "Marcus!" "Don't tell me I don't understand," he pressed on. "I know abandonment. I know loneliness. I know what it feels like to be told I'm not enough, but still, I choose you. Even now, even after everything, it is you." The room pulsed with silence. Angela's heart pounded, torn between fear and the undeniable truth in his voice. For the first time, she could not hide from his devotion. It was raw, it was fierce, and it refused to let go. One afternoon, Angela walked out of the grocery store, her daughter's small hand in hers and her son trailing close behind. She kept her head down, focusing on the children. But she didn't make it far. A group of young women waited near the curb, their polished hair gleaming, their voices sharp with cruelty. Clara Creek stood at the center, her smile thin and cutting. "So, it's true," Clara sneered. "The great Marcus Reed, who could have anyone, wasting himself on you." The others laughed. "Do you really think a man like him will stay? Please, you're nothing but his charity case." Angela froze. Her throat tightened as the words pierced her. She gripped her daughter's hand harder and whispered, "Keep walking." But the laughter followed, echoing down the street. "He'll wake up one day, and you'll be nothing but a memory he regrets." Angela kept her eyes fixed ahead, but inside she bled. Each word reminded her of every fear she already carried. By the time she reached her door, she could hardly breathe. She didn't answer Marcus's calls that night. The cruelty of strangers had revived the walls she was fighting so hard to keep down. That evening, Angela sat on her porch, arms wrapped around herself as the night closed in. She thought she was alone, but then Marcus appeared. He didn't knock, he didn't wait. He simply stepped closer, his face etched with urgency. "Angela," he said, his voice rough. "I can't stay away." She shook her head, her eyes glistening. "You don't understand." "I do," he cut in. "I love you. I love every wrinkle you try to hide, every scar life has left on you. I love the way you hold your children like they are your whole world. Because I want to be part of that world." Her breath hitched. She tried to look away, but his words pinned her where she stood. "You think I'm here because I pity you?" he continued. "No, I'm here because I've never wanted anyone else. Not then, not now, not ever." Angela's lips trembled. She could feel her defenses faltering, her heart pounding against the cage she had built. In the quiet night, his confession hung in the air, raw and undeniable. And for the first time she wondered if she could believe it. Tears welled in Angela's eyes before she could stop them. She covered her face with her hands, shaking her head as if to push his words away, but Marcus stepped forward and gently pulled her hands down. "Why me?" she whispered, her voice cracking. "Why would you choose me? when you could have anyone?" Marcus's gaze softened, yet his answer was unflinching. "Because there has never been anyone else." The simplicity of it undid her. A sob tore from her chest, raw and helpless. She fell against him, her arms clutching at his coat as though she might collapse without his strength. Marcus wrapped her close, his embrace steady and unyielding. He pressed his face into her hair, holding her as if anchoring her to the earth itself. Angela cried into his chest, years of fear, rejection, and self-doubt spilling free. Marcus let her break, let her tremble, let her feel the safety of being held without conditions. When the sobs quieted, she stayed in his arms, her heart pounding in rhythm with his. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to lean on someone else, and in that fragile moment, she let herself believe he might truly stay. The days that followed brought a quiet shift. Angela noticed how her children looked at Marcus. Michael, her son, followed him everywhere, wide-eyed and eager. He listened to Marcus's stories of New York, of building a life from nothing. He asked questions, laughed at his bold gestures, and mimicked his every move. Emily, her daughter, grew even closer. She climbed into his lap with the ease of a child who instinctively trusted. She curled against his chest as if he had always been there. She giggled when he lifted her high, her laughter ringing through the small house. Angela watched in silence, her heart torn. Marcus was not only loving her, he was loving them, and the children were loving him back without hesitation. At night, when she tucked them into bed, Michael whispered, "Mom, he's like a hero." Emily added softly, "I like when he's here." Angela closed the door, her eyes brimming. The innocence of her children made the truth harder to resist. They saw in Marcus what she was too afraid to accept, a man who wanted to be part of their family. And each day, the space he filled in their lives grew harder to deny. Yet even as warmth crept into Angela's heart, fear still lingered. One evening, as Marcus sat with her on the porch while the children slept, she finally gave voice to it. Her hands fidgeted in her lap. Her gaze stayed fixed on the darkened yard. "What if one day you wake up and realize I'm not enough?" she asked softly. "What if you see what everyone else sees? That I'm older, that I'm broken, that I don't belong in your world?" The words trembled out of her like a confession she could no longer keep. She held her breath, bracing for his reply. Marcus turned to her, his face steady, his eyes fixed on hers. But before he could answer, Angela continued, her voice breaking. "My children adore you. They trust you. If you ever walked away, it wouldn't just be my heart that shattered. It would be theirs too, and I don't think I could survive that." The silence that followed was heavy, filled with the weight of her fear. Angela's heart pounded in her chest. She had let him close, but the wall of doubt still stood, tall and unyielding, guarding the last piece of her fragile hope. Marcus reached for Angela's trembling hands. His voice was low, steady, unshakable. "I can't promise the world won't whisper," he said. "I can't promise life will always be easy, but I can promise this. I will never leave you. Not for pride, not for money, not for anyone else. I am yours, Angela, always." Her eyes widened. Tears pooled, threatening to spill. He pressed her knuckles gently against his lips. "You fear abandonment. You fear the day I'll walk away. But that day will never come. Because I have lived with your absence, and it was worse than death. I won't live it again." Angela's breath caught. His words cut through every wall she had built, reaching the part of her heart that still longed to be believed. She closed her eyes, shaking her head as if to resist. But deep inside, something shifted. For the first time, she began to believe his vow was stronger than the voices around them. And Marcus, holding her hand so firmly, knew this was the moment he had waited for. The moment she began to see that his love was not a promise of youth, but a covenant for life. It was a quiet evening. The children were asleep, the house still. In the garden, the air was warm with the scent of grass and the glow of dusk. Marcus turned to Angela, his heart pounding. Slowly, he lowered himself to one knee. Angela gasped, her hand covering her mouth. "Angela Robinson," he began, his voice trembling with raw emotion. "I've waited my whole life to stand here. I don't just want your hand, I want your heart, your soul, your children. I want to love you and them as my own. Will you marry me?" Tears spilled freely down her cheeks. She shook her head in disbelief, whispering, "I never thought this could be for me." The children peeked from the doorway, eyes wide, breath held. Michael grinned, Emily bit her lip in excitement. Angela's voice broke as she whispered, "Yes, yes, I will." Marcus rose, sliding the ring onto her finger. Then he pulled her into his arms as the children cheered. In that small garden, beneath the fading light, a boy's promise became a man's triumph. The vow made years ago now stood unbroken, and for Angela, the impossible became her reality. The day of the wedding arrived. Whispers filled the city. Some called it improper, others mocked the age gap. A few pitied Marcus, saying he had ruined his future, but none of that mattered. Angela walked down the aisle in a simple white dress. No jewels, no extravagance, just elegance, dignity, and a quiet glow that no gossip could dim. At the altar, Marcus stood tall, his eyes fixed only on her. The murmurs of the crowd faded into silence as their gazes met. For him, the room ceased to exist. She was the only one. The children held hands at the front, their faces beaming with pride. They knew this was not just a wedding. It was the beginning of a family, bound not by chance, but by choice. Vows were spoken, voices breaking with emotion. When Marcus kissed her, it was not just a kiss. It was the end of years of waiting, longing, and heartbreak. The applause rose, but for Marcus and Angela, the sound melted away. They stood together finally, as husband and wife, against whispers, against judgment, against the world. The days that followed were not grand, but full of quiet joy. In the mornings, Marcus made breakfast, setting plates before Angela with a kiss to her forehead. In the evenings, they walked through the garden hand in hand, their laughter rising into the night air. Michael learned to throw a ball in the yard, his shouts of triumph echoing as Marcus guided him. Emily curled up beside Marcus at bedtime, demanding one more story, her giggles lighting the small house. Angela watched it all with tears in her eyes. She saw how Marcus cared not only for her, but for her children, as if they had always been his. She saw how he chose them daily, with every action, with every word. There were no crowds, no cameras, no public eyes, just the four of them, building a life stitched together with devotion. And in those simple moments, shared meals, laughter, whispered promises at night, Angela finally understood. Love was not measured by age, nor by society's approval. Love was measured by presence, by sacrifice, by the courage to stay. And Marcus was there. Every day, every night, he stayed. Angela had once believed that age, wrinkles, and scars had stolen her chance to be loved. She had resigned herself to raising her children alone, convinced that love belonged to others. But Marcus Reed proved her wrong. He proved that true love survives distance, silence, and time. He proved that devotion is stronger than whispers, stronger than judgment, stronger than fear. Together, they built a life not defined by money or society, but by the promise to never abandon one another. And in that promise, Angela found healing. She discovered that love had not passed her by. It had been waiting, faithful, and unwavering. If this story has touched your heart, remember this. Love is not bound by age, nor broken by scars. Real love is the courage to choose, again and again, the person who feels like home. And if this story has moved you, share it with someone who still believes their chance at love is gone. Let them know it never is. Don't forget to subscribe so you never miss another story of love that conquers doubt, distance, and time. Because in the end, true love always finds its way home.